and welcome to the bird ID lesson for quiz number 2. So I'm going to go through the birds that are going to be on that quiz. Well, some of them will be on the quiz, not all of them, but the ones you need to know for that quiz. And that quiz happens January 31st, so it's still a ways away, but I'm posting so you can use this for review. Okay, we start with red-tailed hawk. So this is, I think, our first hawk. Red-tails are the most common hawk in North America. You see them all over the place. Often when you see a hawk sort of circling over a field by the road, it's probably a red-tail. I want to look at the silhouette on this one. Red-tails belong to a group of hawks called buteos. Buteos have wide, thick, sort of rounded wings. And they also have a wide, spread out tail when they fly. And so it's good to know the difference between a buteo and we'll see another kind of hawk called an accipiter a little in a week or two. So it's a buteo, and of course it does have the distinctive, let's go down here, distinctive red tail in the mature adults. Now, birds can be tricky because sometimes the females look different than the males, and sometimes the young birds look different than the adults. And in hawks, that is often the case. They have a longer lifespan than a lot of songbirds, and so it takes more time for them to mature. And so often a first-year bird will look different than the adult. But I will only quiz you on a red tail in which you can see the red tail. But if you want to know some of the other distinctive features, particularly when you're driving down the road and you see one perched, you don't necessarily get to see their red tail. So one thing to really look for with a red-tailed hawk is this belly band. So across their stomach they have this spotting streaking that makes this kind of band. Here you can see it over in this bird that's flying as well. It's like almost like a belt. So that's distinctive on a red tail. When they're soaring from underneath, again, you can't necessarily look underneath the tail. You can't necessarily see the color. And so another thing to look for the belly band, but also look for this leading dark edge of the wing. You see how there's almost like this band of dark color that goes right here from their shoulder or from their elbow to the wrist. We'll get into bird anatomy. What you think would be their elbow is actually their wrist. But so look for this dark thing, look for this dark line, look for this belt across their belly, and of course the distinctive red tail. In the younger birds, the tail might be brownish with some stripes, but we won't try to learn that in this class. So just look for the red tail. Okay, you do need to know the call of this bird. This should be a sound that's somewhat familiar to you, if from nothing else from the movies. And this is often when you see, say, an eagle flying in a movie, they will actually put in the sound of a red-tailed hawk because it sounds more impressive than an eagle sounds. So it's often referred to as a scream, sort of a descending scream. Here it is. Okay, so I think you may have heard that before when you're out walking on a nice day when the thermals are rising and you can see the hawk soaring above. So that is a red-tailed hawk. Okay, moving on to our next bird. It is the tufted titmouse. So new birders always giggle a little bit at the name tufted titmouse, but you get used to it after a while. So this is another one of my favorite birds. It's a fairly small bird that does have a bit of a crest on its head, a tuft thus the name, tufted titmouse. Notice it has a black spot on its face, and it also has some underwing coverts. Again, later on we'll learn the names of some of the body parts of a bird, but under the wing here it has a sort of orangey wash. So they're pretty solidly gray. Let's look at some more pictures here. Pretty solidly gray, little tuft, black spot on the face, orangey underwing coverts. And you do need to know this one by sound. This one is probably familiar to some of you because it does come to bird feeders quite a bit. The sound is often referred to as if it were saying Peter, Peter, Peter. It's a little hard because it can do that at different speeds. So it can be a very fast kind of Peter, 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 or it can be a much slower Peter, Peter, Peter. So here it is. So that song makes it sound like it's always the same speed. It's not. So you might be fooled by that at some point. But look for that distinctive sort of two-note phrase. Okay, moving on to our third bird, which is the American goldfinch. Again, this is a bird that will be familiar to those who have watched feeders before. This is an interesting bird because it does an additional molt. So birds molt their feathers every year. They don't drop them all at once, otherwise we'd have, little naked birds running around, which doesn't happen. They don't drop all their feathers at once, but they drop all their feathers once a year and get new ones, fresh ones, because feathers wear out. They aren't permanent things. So some birds, though, do an additional plumage into breeding plumage. So a goldfinch is this bright yellow in the summer during breeding, and then when winter comes, it molts into a darker, blander, more camouflage color. So it doesn't have to be, when we think about the advantage to that, it doesn't have to be vulnerable, bright, easy prey for predators all year round. It only does that part of the year. Although it's expensive, right? It's got to use the energy to grow a whole additional set of feathers a year. But it's a strategy that many birds do employ, especially the birds that are the brightest, because those are the ones that are going to stick out the most to predators. So it's an adaptation to allow them to have bright colors without having to be vulnerable all year round. So this is the American goldfinch, very bright yellow, canary yellow, often referred to as this kind of, this not very orangey, it's very yellowy. It's a very yellow. But they do have a black cap on their head, and the black cap sits very far forward on the head. It's not sort of at the back, it's far forward, goes all the way down to the beak, almost up to the eye, and then they have black and white striped wings. Very, very distinctively colored bird in its breeding plumage. And again, I will only ask you the breeding plumage bird, even though they're pretty easy to identify even in their winter plumage. Here's another look at a male in breeding plumage here. Ignore this guy over here. We will learn yellow warbler later on, but we don't need to know that for now. But notice the finchy beak, okay? So we're going to talk more about different beaks and what they, the functions that they serve. But goldfinches are seed eaters, and you can tell that. Seed eaters have powerful, thick beaks that are used to break open seeds. And if you're an insect eater, you don't need that kind of power necessarily. You need different features. So it has a very distinctively finch beak and yellow color, black cap, black wings with white stripes. Okay, you do need to know the call of the American goldfinch. Actually, I'm going to change that because American goldfinches are not the easiest to learn, especially if you're not familiar with what finch calls sound like in general. but I will play it for you. The American goldfinch is a very complex sound, a very complex call, as most finches are, very sort of twittery. But every once in a while, the goldfinch makes a sound that's kind of like a little whine, like ah, ah, and that helps actually give it its Latin name. Um, its species name is tristis, which refers to its sadness in Latin, because it sounds kind of sad with that little whine in its voice. So let's just listen to it. Okay, so maybe you heard that little whine in there. It wasn't as sort of whiny and slow as sometimes. So that is one reason I'm going to take it out. So Merry Christmas. You don't have to know American Goldfinch by sound. Okay, let's go on to our next bird, which is the common grackle. All right, look at this grackle. So magnificent looking, right? It's blue and purple and yellow and green, sort of. So common grackles are black birds that have what we call iridescence, which means that given a certain sunlight reflection, they shimmer and shine with colors much like an oil spot in a parking lot does. So those colors are not really embedded in the feathers. It's how the light is reflecting off of it, and sometimes they will look very simply black. And that's the way you really should probably think of them as a black bird. Now, one of the key features in identifying a grackle you can see in the silhouette, and that is the shape of its tail. So their tail sort of V's out, and it makes, when it sits, it makes kind of almost like a rudder on the back. It's got this little thing that hangs down. They actually fold their tail up in an interesting way. So be looking for a black bird. Notice it's not quite as chunky as the crow was. Okay, so remember, we do have an all black bird in the crow. This has more iridescence, and it has a long tail with kind of the rudder on the side. The shape is a little different as well. Let's look at another picture which is more like you'd see, and we can compare it here to the crow. So here is the grackle. Another feature to note is the light-colored eye. So if you remember, the American crow had a dark eye. The grackle has a yellow eye, and it's more iridescent. Okay, you can't really see the difference too much in the tail, but you can see that there's a bigger tail here than you see in the crow. Let's see if there's any other pictures that might be helpful. This is the picture that I would think of. Again, here you can really see more the rudder shape on the tail. You can see that when they fly as well, so it's easy to see them when they fly. A more delicate beak, a yellow eye, and iridescence, particularly on the head. It's very iridescent. And you do not need to know the common grackle by call, but I will play it for you just here. It's a very, they're in the blackbird family, and they have blackbirds in general have a very raspy sound to their voice, and this is certainly a raspy voice. So, oops, sorry about that. So that is the common grackle. Okay, moving on to our next bird. Our first warbler. This is a bird called a common yellowthroat. And as you will learn in this course, I'm particularly fond of the birds that are in a group called warblers. They're often referred to as the jewels of the forest or the gems of the forest, because they are often really bright colored, very small birds that don't come to feeders. And so people don't even know they're around, but there's sort of these little treasures flying around that you hardly notice. Um, this one is called the common yellowthroat. It's kind of the bandit of the warbler world. So this is a little, very small bird, and it has a very distinctive, the male has a very distinctive black mask with a white eye line above it, or it's not really an eye line, kind of an eyebrow above that, and of course the yellow throat. That's the name, common yellow throat. So this gives you a good idea of the size of the warblers. Think of the size of, say, a goldfinch, but do notice that the beak is different. Remember how the goldfinch had a thick beak? Warbler beaks are much more delicate. So here is a good picture as well. Black mask, white eye, white line on top of the mask, and a bright yellow throat. Pretty distinctive. I don't think you're going to get it confused. Let's see what they compare it with. Is I think, oh, Connecticut warbler. Yeah, see, it doesn't even look anything like that. So I don't think you're going to confuse it with things. But you do need to know this one by song. So this is a song that probably many of you are not familiar with. It makes a very distinctive song that often people says, witchity, witchity, witch, or witchity, 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 witch. So here it is. Okay, so that's the common yellowthroat. Now we are going to do a bird that is probably a little more familiar, and that is the eastern bluebird. What a beautiful bird, huh? This is the eastern bluebird. Um, Everyone loves a bluebird. They're very sort of sweet. They have a sweet personality. As I said, I band birds, which means I catch them in nets and take data on them and put a little band on their leg. And bluebirds are just the sweetest little things when you catch them, and they make that kind of saddest little noise too when they're caught. But they are just this beautiful blue color. I said we'd talk about blue later. Just like I said with the common yellowthroat, blue, there's no actual pigment in the feather that creates the blue color. It's just the way the light reflects off your eyes, which is crazy when you look at how brightly colored a bluebird is. It seems so blue, but there isn't any actual pigment causing that. It's the refraction of the light. And then this bright sort of, it's this much the same color as a robin breast, so that reddish orange breast. It doesn't go all the way down though. Notice it's white underneath. The male and females are different. The females are just same kind of pattern, but a little more drab. They're more kind of gray blue, slate blue, and the orange is not as distinct. And we haven't talked about that, but you know, if you wonder why the males are usually the bright ones, it's because the females are often the ones that have to be in the most vulnerable place, being the nest. So being on a nest is a very vulnerable place to be. You're vulnerable, and also your chicks are vulnerable, and so you want to stay as camouflaged as possible on the nest. So that is why the males pay the price of being the brightly colored ones, and the females are not as brightly colored. Also, the females do the choosing. With almost every animal species, the females do the choosing. The males do the showing off, and the females choose which mate that they're going to select. And so males are brightly colored to attract mates, of course. So it's pretty easy to tell a bluebird. I don't think you're going to get them confused with anything else. I won't even do a comparison. You do not need to know the call for the bluebird. So we can go on to the next bird, unless you want to hear it. Well, you can listen to it yourself. Okay. Great blue heron. I'm sure most of you have seen the great blue heron on the edges of ponds and wetlands fishing. Um, Beautiful, large bird. It's amazing when they're out of the water and they're standing up how tall they actually are. Um, Herons sit upright and have good sized feet and legs because they are on the ground a lot. And here is a good picture of the great blue. Um, let's see, what features do you want to know besides the shape? I wish I had a better picture. All right, I'll bring this one up. So ignore this over here. This is the sandhill crane. We'll learn that later. But the great blue heron has a black stripe, and it actually has I don't know what to call it, feathers that come out on the back of its head in a plume. It's a plume that sticks out. So they have a little black plume. They actually have on their body as well, often these white plumy feathers back here on their back. Their chest is somewhat striped. You can't see that in this photo. Let's see if we've got a better photo here somewhere. Oh, not really. But this one you can see the plumes on the back that I was speaking of. Here you can see that the black cap doesn't actually go all the way across. But you can't really see the belly stripes on any of these photos. Really long neck. So if you ever get a chance to see a heron fishing, just watch it for a while. It's pretty amazing. That neck is used as like a spring to be able to stab into the water like a spear really forcefully. We'll talk more about that when we get to what different beak shapes do. But that beak is a fishing beak. Let's go back to a better picture. And notice how very sharp. They actually, sorry, it keeps coming up when I move my cursor. They actually stab the fish with its beak partly open so that they can get these really sharp pointed points that work like a spear. So a really long fishing beak, striped chest, dark plume on the head, sort of a slate blue-gray bird. You do not need to know this one by its song. However, I do want to play it for you because it sounds so prehistoric to me. It sounds very dinosaur-like. And I think that's interesting because, as we will learn, birds are more similar genetically to dinosaurs than they are to any living animal. They are closer relatives to dinosaurs than they are to anything else. And this sounds much like a dinosaur. Although, I don't know what a dinosaur sounds like. And perhaps I only think this is what a dinosaur sounds like because someone sampled this and used it as a dinosaur sound. Okay, so you don't hear that a whole lot. They don't make that noise a lot. Okay, moving on to the last bird in our list, and that is a killdeer. Killdeers fall into the category of something that are referred to as shorebirds. These are birds that feed along the sides, the shores of lakes and streams and ponds and oceans. So the killdeer is the most common shorebird we have around this area. They are very graceful on their feet. They run very fast. They have kind of a medium-sized beak for a shorebird. The most distinctive feature that will distinguish this bird from other shorebirds is that it has two necklaces, two neck stripes. Okay, so it has one, and there's space, and then there's another one. That's very important to distinguish it from some other birds that look very similar. We aren't necessarily going to be learning those in this class, but it's good to remember. It also has a little eye line, white spot. It has kind of a white eyebrow and a black eye line. Let's go down here. Here's a good picture. Now, killdeer are interesting because you will not just find them along the shores of wetlands, you also can find them in fields, agricultural fields. And this is a good feature. It has a very large eye. Remember the two necklaces, the two stripes. Killdeer also do this wonderful broken wing thing that they try to do to lure. If there's a predator getting close to the nest, one of the adults will act like its wing is broken and kind of keep just staying a little bit in front of you, but acting like it's injured to try to draw you toward it instead of the nest. And it's pretty interesting. You might want to check out a video of the broken wing display from Killdeer. And amazingly enough, I do not have you learning this one by sound. I would think I would, but I guess I'm not. So I will play it for you anyway. They say their name. It's pretty simple. They say, Killdeer, Killdeer, Killdeer. Okay, so there are the birds for this week. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope this was helpful.